relatives, elders. My name is Tiffany. It was given to me by my tama, Elaine Alec, on the day I was born. My name is Elaine Alec. My late mother is Sophie Alec from the Penticton Indian Band. She was the daughter of the late Elaine Alec and Chief Jack Alec. My late father was Saul Kenzie Basil from the Bonaparte Indian Band from the Syilx Nation. He was the son of Saul and Louisa Basil. And I'm very happy to be here today. And I was sitting here really nervous. I always get extra nervous when I have to speak at home. And the stories I share also come from home and some of the hurts and traumas. And so that makes it a little bit more difficult because Penticton is where I grew up and Penticton is my home. And I see so many people in the room who are my family and who I've grown up with, and people who have mentored me through my life and who have given me the tools and the stories that I have needed in this journey that I've taken in the work that I do. I would not be who I am today and would not be able to do the work that I do without my people from my community and without my nation. So I always like to acknowledge all of those teachings and who I am because I was raised by my community. So before I start any of my sessions, I always do prayer. And when I pray, I ask that the Creator watch over all of the people that are going to come into the room, that the Creator takes care of all of their hearts and all of their spirits and everything that they are, and that they're safe when they come into the room. And I also pray for the people who can't make it into the room, who want to be in the room, but just don't feel like it's their time to come to the room yet. And I also pray for the people who have been stolen from us, who can't be with us because their lives were taken. I also pray for myself that I do not say anything that will cause any harm, and that I say the things that are meant to be said, but that I also don't say things that don't need to be said. And I pray that my ego doesn't take over while I'm speaking. And so that's how I always start my sessions. And whenever I go out into the communities or do this kind of work, especially this work, when I was asked to do it, I wasn't sure if I wanted to take it on. I ended up in the role of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs Women's Representative very accidentally. I didn't know if it was something that I could take on. The role was intimidating. The previous women's representative was Kula Lewis from the Okanagan Indian Band, and she was a hardcore advocate across the country and internationally for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And I felt like I couldn't follow in her footsteps. And I felt like it was a very intimidating role to take on because I didn't see myself in it at the time. I didn't see how I could contribute to that. But as I started traveling and started going to meetings and listening to women and hearing their stories, every single woman that came up to speak with me had a story. And every single woman had something on their heart that they needed to share. And so through a lot of the speaking that I did, I shared my personal story, which was growing up on the Penticton Indian Band Reserve, and growing up as the daughter of an alcoholic, and growing up in a community where I'm 42 years old now, but when I was a child, almost every single home in our community was a party house. And so I experienced a lot of sexual abuse within my community from between the ages of 4 and 10. And not just from one person, but from many people. And this part, I often share freely, and so many people connect with me on this piece, and they feel like they're not alone. But that piece, I was really trying to figure out if I should share it here in this space or not. But I think it's really important. I started drinking at a very young age. I started smoking at a very young age, and I started jumping on the highway and hitchhiking to Prince George by the time I was 12. And so I put myself in a lot of really risky situations because I didn't feel loved. I felt abandoned. I felt nobody cared about me, and so I didn't care about myself. And I was constantly trying to find somebody to love me. And I became really promiscuous as a young girl, trying to find anybody that called me beautiful. I would have sex with them because that's what I thought love was. Because nobody taught me what love was, and I didn't understand it. And so through the work that I do and the speaking that I do, I share really honestly and openly about who I am and what I've been through, because I know it relates to so many people in our communities. And I know that one of the things that is killing our people and that causes us to run and leave or not deal with things is that shame. And shame often comes from the silence because we refuse to talk about those things that hurt us. And so we stuff it and stuff it and stuff it, and they come out in self-defeating behaviors or ways in which we hurt ourselves. And so I turned, when I got asked to do this work took me to 12 communities across the province. It wasn't just the communities, we picked a community where as many First Nations communities or individuals could come to gather and talk about Indigenous women and girls' safety. And we had to think really long and hard about it. And it was really tough for me at first because I wanted to have a couple of sessions in the South. One, because this is where I'm from and I knew I'd be asked, how come you didn't have one here? And I got a lot of emails asking me why I did that, but I wanted to share, some of the realities of the communities in our province. We're really lucky in the South Okanagan. We can access a lot of different areas and cities within a short period of time on main roads and highways. We can make it to Vancouver in 4 hours. We can get to Merritt in an hour. We can get to Kamloops in 2.5. From Williams Lake, we can get to Merritt in a couple of hours. And it's really easiest for access, transportation, and ways of getting around down here. But when you start looking to the north, in the northern communities, you can go up to Terrace and have a session there and still have to have people who need to travel 9 hours on a dirt road from a community that's only run on diesel. And so when you're trying to get to as many people as possible to talk about Indigenous women and girls' safety, we need to talk and think about those communities who are often left behind and forgotten. Because there's women in those communities who, even if they wanted to run, they physically couldn't leave their communities. So that was the reason why we chose the communities that we chose. We also wanted to make sure that we were creating a safe space, and so the first thing I did was I started to phone home. And I started to phone home and I started talking to women and I started talking to elders and talking about our stories and wanting to know, how I should do this work. And of course it always goes back to our stories, our coyote stories, and our creation stories, and our 4 food chief stories and inclusion. Our 4 food chief story, those protocols and stories within those teachings, when you practice those things, that is an act of decolonization. Because when you lay the protocols out for the people that are going to come together, those protocols are put in place to create a safe space for everybody to hear each other's perspectives. Matriarchal and egalitarian systems meant that we worked from a love-based place, and we understood that every single person had purpose, even if we didn't agree with them. Even if I didn't like what you were saying, I knew, because of my teachings, that you had purpose to be here. And my responsibility as a Syilx person is to keep my mind open to that, to make sure that my mind is open so that I can hear all bits of information that's coming into me, so that we can connect and bind and unify and move together, move forward together. And one of the things that one of my teachers told me was, she said, when you're doing this work, she said, remember the teachings of Coyote and Fox. She said, when Coyote would do something wrong or, be silly and make a mistake and he would die. And in our stories, his body and his guts were flown all over the place, and you can see his markings on the land. And his brother Fox would come and gather up all of the bits and try to make sure that he had all of the bits of Coyote to bring them together. And then he'd bring Coyote together. And I hope somebody helps me with this because I never know which one it is I've seen twice. but fox jumps over coyote either 3 times or 4 times. And I've seen them both. And so he does that, and then he breathes life into him, and fox comes back to life. And she said, that is what you need to do when you do this work. You're gathering the bits, and that's all you're doing. You're going as far and wide as you can, and creating space for people to share, and you're creating that space, and you're gathering the bits, and you're pulling them together, and then you're going to breathe life into it. And so we talk to people from all over the province to ask about protocols, to ask about how we can create a safe space for people to come in. We had cultural workers there, we had mental health workers, we had representatives from the Family Information Liaison Unit, all come in to support people. Because one of the things that we had to realize as well was there's such a wide spectrum of individuals with experiences and perspectives throughout our community, not just in our communities, but in our nations, within our regions, within our organizations. We have lifelong advocates of 35 years, and I'm so happy to see Gladys here because she came to 2 of our sessions. But we have lifelong advocates who know, who understand what systemic is and what systemic racism is, and all of the reasons and underlying issues of why this happens, and who understand human rights, and who understand all of those big terminology things that you hear thrown around by government all the time, who understand that, who've been doing this work for 35 years, and who've said, we're tired of talking about this, we need action. We also understood that we were going to be coming into communities where there were individuals who never left the community. There are individuals who don't understand what colonization means, or what systemic means, or what any of those other words they're talking about. They don't see a connection to themselves and multi-generational trauma. They just know that things are really messed up in the community. They know that there are people that hurt each other, and when they say something about it, nothing's done. And they know that people, in power can sometimes be the worst perpetrators, and so they have fear about even talking about it. And so silence has become the norm in our communities. And so even when you see an invitation to something like MMIWG or Indian Residential School Survivors, individuals don't see themselves connected to that. And so when we came to the circle, we wanted to make sure that everybody felt safe. We didn't want anybody to get attacked for not knowing. We didn't want anybody to get attacked because, they're too much of this or too much of that, or didn't have enough of this, or didn't know what they were doing, or didn't know what they were talking about. We wanted to hear the perspectives of everybody, and we wanted to hear the experiences from everybody. And one of the things that we did was we created these protocols to create space for everybody listening in the circle. And when we were done the 12th session in Vancouver, we had witnesses come to breathe life into the work. And one of the women who was at the sessions, she said, land acknowledgement is important. She said, but I think these protocols are even more important. These protocols are even more important in how we come together and make decisions, and how we're going to agree to be together. Because we need to start doing that. These protocols are needed in the way we make decisions, in meetings, in the way we do everything. Because we've far too long adopted colonial and patriarchal ways of doing things, which is fear-based, and a right and wrong way of doing things. And that's, I'm right and you're wrong, and this is good and this is bad. And so, allowing people to speak, not debating with people, disagreeing or putting down anyone's views. And the most important one is practicing active listening or witnessing. And that requires discipline. A discipline that's taught to us through being raised by our elders. Our elders teach us that discipline to listen. They teach us to listen in a way where we hear everything that's being said, where we're not going off into our head and arguing with them in our heads, finding a way to prove them wrong, thinking about what I'm going to say next. Oh, I'm 2 people away. What am I going to say? Or, oh, I forgot. Am I going to get the chicken at 2 and put it in at 3? Being really disciplined in how we listen and come to the space. Staying on topic, being brief to allow everybody to speak, not swearing, using racist or sexist language. The swearing came because there were youth that said swearing scares them. Even if it's just your common everyday language, when you hear swearing, especially certain words, that just triggers them because it reminds them of something scary that's happening at home. We ask people to really try to practice not swearing. Please turning off cell phones, doing your best to not leave the circle, maintaining the confidentiality of the stories, taking care of each other, and practicing self-care. Through our teachings, we were all told to take care of each other. It's not up to the responsibility of the people holding a special position, not the person hosting the circle, not the person who's there to take care of you, but it's a communal responsibility for us all to take care of each other. And the responsibility should not just lie on one person. Our communities never work like that. And so, our well-being and our health and our safety does not rely on one person. Doesn't rely on the health department, doesn't rely on the band office, doesn't rely on chief and council. It's a communal responsibility that we have as part of the community. So the 12 questions we asked were questions that, there was 12 here and there's another 5 at the end. But the 12 questions that we started with were, how can we ask questions that aren't going to be, how can we do better? Setting up the surveys. We've got over 3,000 recommendations from over 25 years on how to make things better. And we're still talking about it. And so we wanted to ask questions where we could come together and find ways to talk about things we don't really want to talk about and create action items. And so I really want to thank Lorraine Trebasket. I worked really closely with Lorraine to help me figure out some of these questions. If we can go back to the first 12. So what were the historic ways that women were honored and protected? What have been the cultural practices that protect women and girls and provide direction to our men in the protection of women? What do our traditional stories tell us about violence prevention or emotional health in our communities? What ways can we honor and protect women from a modern context? What training and education is needed to prevent the objectification, abduction, and murder of our women? What can women and girls do to increase safety and prevent and address abductions? What is the role of men in ensuring safe and violence-free families and communities? What safety measures can be employed in groups and families? What supports are needed in reporting and addressing failed abductions or ongoing violence? What is the role of women in ensuring safe and violence-free families and communities? How should women support each other in the prevention of violence and abduction? And what do we know about the risk factors and at-risk behaviors, and how can we build a safe practice for protection? So those questions were hard, but they weren't as hard as this next piece. In some of the sessions that we did, they motored through the first 12 really quickly. These last 5 questions, some people had to sit down because they said, we're not even there yet. We have no way how to answer these questions. And these ones we gave more context to. What is needed to feel safe in reporting violence, failed abduction, or information on murdered and missing women? Why don't we feel safe? Why aren't things being done? We can't report it to our own community members. We don't trust anybody within our own community. How come we can't? What do we need to feel safe in reporting? How can families feel empowered and have a voice in advocacy to police our justice systems and their ongoing processes through these systems? Are there other advocacy initiatives that can be developed to find missing women? Is there something else that can be done by our own Indigenous families, by our own Indigenous communities, by our own Indigenous nations, and our own Indigenous governments? This was the part where, when we look to our language and our responsibilities, we do not just have rights as Indigenous people, we have responsibilities. And those responsibilities also tell us that we have a responsibility to take care of all living beings within our territories. And so when somebody goes missing within our territories, it's our responsibility to come forward and help find those people. How can families address healing of murdered and or missing family members? How can reconciliation occur between victims and perpetrators? And one of the things that we asked with one of the previous questions is, how can we support each other as women? We asked that because we are women. We said it's important we talk about the realities and acknowledge it if we want to change it, is we have lateral violence in our communities, and when something happens, it turns to gossip. If someone's been raped, if someone's been promiscuous, if someone puts themselves in a bad position and they deserved it, oh, they were wearing something like that, you know, and we tend to gossip about that or say they deserved it, or, you know, it becomes a place where we don't feel safe with even our own women in our communities. And so one of the questions we ask is, how can we create a safe space as women so that women can come forward? So I'm going to wrap it up because I know I don't have that much time, but if we could just kind of flip through. That's some of the feedback we've had. We've got a website called pathforward.ca, and we have the full report on there. If you go to the next one. We also had a lot of different spaces available for people to do things who couldn't participate in all of the conversations and needed a break from it. We had medicine at every one. But one of the things I wanted to share before I end was, I was talking to my husband about everything I was learning. I said, every time we have a circle, the women come to the circle and they're scared. And they say, I don't know why I came. I don't know what I'm doing here. I felt like I didn't want to come, but if I don't come and tell my story, it's going to be harder for my children and my daughters to come forward. So I just felt like I had to come. And I'm so angry at the injustice that's happening in our communities. I'm angry and I'm mad at everybody, at my own family, my own community, my own leadership. I'm mad at the government, I'm mad at Canada. I'm angry because I feel like there's nothing that we can do. How are we going to do this? And by creating that safe space and working through those questions together from our own authentic self, where we let people know, answer these questions the way you want to answer these questions. Don't ask me to interpret these questions for you. If you understand these 12 questions in your own way and you create a story in your mind and what you think should be done, you don't have to follow the format answering the questions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just tell your story. Create art. Do whatever you want to do to participate from your strength and your understanding and your experience. There's no right or wrong way to contribute with your voice to this work. And so by the end of it, we had paper on the walls with all of these action items on what we wanted to do. Here's something we can do. Here's a few other things we can do that we can do. And they left feeling empowered. And they left feeling like they could actually do something now. And they felt like, there was a path forward. And when I told my husband about that, I said, it was beautiful to see that. And he said, do you know what that is? And I said, what is that? And he said, that is self-determination. That is self-determination when we come together and we talk about what we know and contribute to our own solutions and find ways to move forward together without relying on anybody else. And so I really want to hold up the 300 plus individuals that came to those circles from all across the province to create this report. This report does not belong to anybody. That was an agreement we all made. We don't own this report. All of the information is shareable. You can take it, you can use the questions, you can use the format. If there's anything in there that you see yourself in and you want to take and adopt and use as your foundation for your action plans and your organizations, or even the conversations in your own family, use it any way that you want, because knowledge is meant to be shared. And and we do not own this, and we need to come together and support each other if we want to create a safe space for our women and girls. White women.